of the lynchings at the Moores Ford Bridge. This is the 7th year that we've conducted the reenactment. We are pleased and happy that First African Baptist Church continues to accommodate us, and they have been since 1968, Reverend.
Wow.
When Dr. King was scheduled to fly from Memphis, Tennessee to Monroe, Georgia on April 4th, 1968. The little airstrip that he was going to land in, the United Automobile Workers plane, was over here on the other side of town. Robert Howard was waiting at the airport, cleaned off the strip, had the lights on, the flags up, and we were sitting watching NBC News, and Chet Huntley said Dr. King has been shot, and they switched to Memphis, and the correspondent said Dr. King is dead. I was down the road 11 miles in a social circle watching NBC. They were up here waiting on the plane. The plane never made it, of course. But Dr. King had made a commitment to us in Macon, Georgia on March 21st, 1968. Hosea Williams had called us young kid rookies to Macon, and we were there at New Zion Baptist Church where Abernathy and King were speaking, promoting the Poor People's Campaign. And Mr. Dan Young from here, who buried the Moores Ford victims, walked into the church, and he challenged Dr. King and Dr. Abernathy. He said, Martin, you and Ralph need to come on and deal with this Moores Ford case. And Dr. King said, Dan, when Ralph and I finish in Memphis, we'll come into Monroe to focus on the Moores Ford case. He said, remember, I was 17 years old when the lynchings occurred. I wrote letters to everybody. The Atlanta Constitution printed my letter, and the Black Press, the Daily World, the Pittsburgh Courier, and all the black papers. And he said, Ralph and I are coming. They had planned on flying out of Memphis here on April 4th, 68. That's why I was still here. Jose kept me here. Willie Bolden was the project director here in 1968. Robert Howard was the president of SCLC here in 1968. He'll be here in a few minutes. So Dr. King couldn't make it. Dr. Abernathy came. Dr. Abernathy led us from Social Circle to Monroe. That's 11 miles. We walked all the way. Willie Bolden was with us. Robert Howard. We had probably 200 or 300 folks. Then Jose came here and spoke in that church right there several times. Jose actually lived over here for months. He wouldn't leave. When Dr. Lowry became president, we brought him in. He came 3 or 4 times. We brought Jesse Jackson, John Lewis, Andrew Young was here last year with us. Charles Steele has been coming since 2005. Reverend Bostella, Ed Dubose, the state president of the NAACP. Helen Butler, Walter Butler, who's now deceased. Walter was president of the state for years. So all of these great leaders have just been coming and coming and coming and coming, and they are demanding that the killers who are still living are prosecuted for this heinous massacre. It is the last open public mass lynching in America. Now, I was personally asked to come back in 1999 by Robert Howard. We had just elected Roy Barnes governor, and I was sitting in my office at the Capitol trying to recover from that campaign and cleaning out my office, and the phone rang, and it was Robert Howard. He said, man, we need you back over here. We want to get back on the Moores Ford case. So I came over, and he took me to an 85-year-old black man whose name was Roy Jackson. Mr. Jackson lived not far from the church, and he said he wanted to tell his story about what he saw on July 25th, 1946 at the Moores Ford Bridge. He said he was in the woods playing, and he said he saw the mobsters. He saw the Klan because they didn't cover their faces. He said he saw them. He saw a Walton County deputy sheriff's car that led to long caravan from the bridge after the massacre. He could identify them. And I told Robert, I said, Robert, before we talk to him, we need an FBI agent in the room. So I called U.S. Attorney Janet Martin over in Macon. She called Attorney General Janet Reno, Beverly Martin in Macon. She's now a federal judge in Atlanta. She called Janet Reno, and Janet Reno gave her the authority as Attorney General. She said, I'm assigning an agent from the Athens FBI office, Mike Risen. So he drove over, and Robert Howard convinced him to go and get a video camera. He said, Mr. Jackson is very ill. Get a video camera because we don't know how long he's going to live. So we went to Mr. Jackson's house, and the FBI agent turned the camera on beside his bed, and he said, I'm not going to talk until I see that boy Brooks. Is he here? And Robert Howard said, yeah, he's here. Here's Tyrone Brooks. So I shook Mr. Jackson's hand. And Mr. Jackson, we're going to get out of the way. We're going to let the FBI agent interview you. So we left the house, me and Laura Wexler, who wrote the book Fire Canebrake. Laura was a grad student at UGA down the road in Athens. We rode around town to give the FBI time to interview Mr. Jackson. When we came back and looked at the interview, everything Mr. Jackson said was in the FBI report of 1946. He called some names that were in the report. He talked about the sheriff deputy car leading the procession. There was a long procession of vehicles leaving that bridge after the lynching. He talked about what time it occurred, which was in the FBI report, like 6:30 p.m. So we knew Mr. Jackson was in the woods. He had seen this. And unfortunately, about 3 months later, Mr. Jackson died. But we have his affidavit on video, and that's a part of the evidence. A few weeks later, I went to Governor Barnes, and I had been over here, at that interview, and I went to Roy. When I walked in Roy Barnes' office, he said, "Where you been?" I said, "I've been to Monroe." He said, "I bet you on that Mooresford case, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "We back on it again." He said, "Tyrone, when I was a law student at UGA, our law professors used to have segments on the Mooresford Bridge." He said sometimes they would come in, they talk about the killers, they talk about evidence, they'll talk about the victims. And he said, we sit there as law students and we would listen to these professors, argue the case and why the FBI and the GBI and these other law enforcement agencies didn't prosecute the killers. And he said, "What do you want me to do?" I said, "Well, you're the governor of Georgia." I said, "Why don't you order this case reopened officially?" He didn't say a word. He got up from his desk, went to his computer, and he sent an email to the GBI, to Buddy Nix, who was director at that time. And he gave me a copy of the email. The email basically said, "I'm sitting here with my friend Tyrone Brooks, and we're talking about the Mooresford Bridge lynchings. And I'm ordering this case reopened today, and the full resources of the state are at your disposal." And that was late '99. When the session convened in the General Assembly the next year, we introduced a resolution calling for the arrest and prosecution of the killers. That resolution passed unanimously. Republicans, Democrats, the lawmakers who represent this area, Walton County area, they signed it. They voted for it. It passed unanimously. So the state is on record. A few years later, after we got into this, we went to Congressman John Lewis and we asked him to sponsor the Emmett Till bill to focus on these unsolved killings. And John did. Senator Christopher Dodd over in the Senate sponsored it over there. The bill passed the Senate. We passed the House first with only 2 dissenting votes. Congressman Lynn Westmoreland from Coweta County, Georgia, and Ron Paul from Texas. Only 2 votes in the United States Senate. Governor Nathan Deal, who's now governor, he voted for the bill. He was in the House then. He voted for the bill. So that bill passed the House. 2 years later, it passed the Senate. And President George Bush signed the bill into law on October 7th of 2008. So now we're calling on President Obama to request full funding of the Emmett Till bill so that the Mooresford Bridge lynching case, Emmett Till, Vernon Damon, all these old outstanding cold cases, the Moore family in Florida who were lynched and burned, we want these old cold cases to be prosecuted wherever suspects are still living. So the next step is to get Congressman Lewis to convene the Congressional Black Caucus, get you, our national leader, and other leaders, Jesse Jackson, Ben Jealous, all of you leaders with the Congressional Black Caucus, go to the president. Say, "Mr. President, now George Bush signed this bill on October 7, 2008. It calls for $100 million in appropriation to finance the prosecution of these old cold cases. It calls for $10 million for 10 years. And so we are waiting on that to happen. I know President Obama is going through a lot right now with Congress, and the debt ceiling and all that, but we just feel like these old cold cases must be addressed. They must be addressed because as we stand here today, brother, the FBI is working with the International War Crimes Commission. They are rounding up old Nazis in Spain, in Germany. They are trying these old Nazis for their war crimes against innocent Jews during the Holocaust. 42 cases, 43, 44. That occurred before Mooresford. They are prosecuting them at the International Criminal Court in the Netherlands in The Hague. So all we're saying is we want our domestic terrorists to be prosecuted as we focus on international terrorism. Whether it's Afghanistan or Norway this morning, we're reading about Norway, Iraq, Great Britain, wherever. We just feel like These cases over here are just as important as anything going on in the world. These suspects are getting up in age. They're in the 80s and 90s now. Most of the suspects were in the early 20s, mid 20s. If you were 25 years old in 1946, you'd be 90 now. You look at Dr. Lyra, who was 25 years old in 1946. He's healthy and vibrant, preaching, speaking, traveling. So most of the suspects was under 25. So they would be in the mid 80s now. So this is where we are. This is an old SCLC project. It was on Dr. King's agenda. Abernathy, Lowry, Charles Steele, John Lewis, Andy Young, Jesse Jackson. We're trying to get Benjamin Todd Jealous to come. Ed DuBose called me this morning. He's headed to the National Convention in Los Angeles. And he said, Tyrone, he said, you tell the crowd today, if they schedule the National Convention on the reenactment day again, he said, I'm going to miss the convention. I'm going to be in Monroe because he's been here every year. Charles Steele came up with the idea to do the reenactment. It wasn't mine. It wasn't James Orange. It was Charles Steele. We were standing on the bridge April 4th, 2005, and Charles Steele turned to me and he said, Tyrone, we need to reenact this. I said, okay. I never thought about that, Charles. And James Orange said, amen. Roberta Abdul Salam, state representative, said, amen. Janice Mathis of Rainbow Point said, amen. And Robert Howard here said, amen. And so Charles Steele gave us the idea to conduct the reenactments. We never thought about it. So we've been conducting these since 2005. And believe me, the world comes. We have a delegation over here from Malawi. Hey, right here. Malawi, right here. He moved on me. Now you will see brothers and sisters from Nigeria, from Ethiopia, from Somalia, Cuba, South Africa. You'll see students from UGA and Emory and Balter College and Kennesaw State. They just come from everywhere. Fort Valley State will be here. But this is the man who's been living here with this all his life, Mr. Dan Young, the Undertaker. Robert, come over and meet the new president of SCLC. This is Robert Howard.
New president. Oh, okay.
He was our chapter president in Walton County for years, working with Mr. Dan Young.
Pleasure to be with you.
And Reverend Creecy is our new national. Turn around this way, so they can get you on the camera. Okay, good to see y'all today. The Walton Tribune local newspaper, the weekly paper, they've been covering this ever since we started the movement. And it's the local paper that's always been very fair and objective, and we appreciate them coming. And sometimes it's difficult in a small town to have the local newspaper identify with the movement. They've always covered it, and we appreciate them. But I've given you a little history on this. This is not just an event to us. This is a movement to us. He was introduced to the Moores Ford case in 1967 by Mr. Dan Young, who buried the victims. Mr. Young showed me the photographs in his funeral home down on Washington Street when Jose sent me here in 1968. I had no knowledge of the Moores Ford. I was just a young kid rookie. And Jose said, go see Dan Young when we get to Monroe. So I drove over here, I had a brand new car. I had a 1969 Oldsmobile 442. I pulled up there in that little car. He said, son, you can't drive over here like this by yourself. He said, I have a son at Morehouse, Danny Jr., and we don't let that boy drive over here alone. He said, we meet him halfway. He said, do you know where you are? I said, I'm in Monroe. He said, no, you're in the headquarters of the Ku Klux Klan. I said, what? He said, come on down to my basement, let me show you something. So he took me downstairs in his basement. He opened up a file cabinet and spread a big folder on a long conference table. In the folder were a lot of photographs of dead people. I said, Mr. Young, what is this? He said, these are black people who were killed at the Moores Ford Bridge. Have you heard of it? I said, no, sir. I don't know anything about it. He said, let me educate you on this. He said, this is Roger Malcolm. This is Dorothy Malcolm. This is George Dorsey. This is Mae Murray Dorsey. Then he came back to Dorothy. He put his finger on her again. He said, this one right here, she was 7 months pregnant, and the Klan cut her baby out of her womb. And he said, I had to bury all of them. He said, I'm going to call Jose and Abernathy and tell them never to let you drive over here alone again. I was blown away. I called Jose up the same day. I said, why didn't you tell me that he was going to show me that? He said, well, I didn't know he was going to show it to you. He said, I should have told you that Dan Young has been telling Dr. King and Abernathy and myself that we needed to come back to focus on this Moores Ford lynching case. finally, I told Reverend Creecy about going to Macon. Robert Howard led the caravan from here to Macon to New Zion Baptist Church, March 21st, 1968. And we heard Dr. King stand up and say, when Ralph and I leave Memphis, we are coming to Monroe to help you deal with this Moors for. He was really talking to Dad Young. He wasn't talking to us. But the night Dr. King was going to fly from Memphis to Monroe on the plane owned by the United Automobile Workers Union, he was assassinated in Memphis. Now, Robert Howard was over at the airfield. They had the lights on, they had the flags up, and we got word that Dr. King was dead. He was over at the airfield. I was sitting in social circle in the home of Ralph and Myrtle Ivy watching NBC News. And I got the word from Chet Huntley, who was anchoring from New York, that Dr. King was dead. I was devastated. I thought I was going to die. And Claudette Matthews, our receptionist at SCLC, called me up. She said, where are you? I said, in social circle. Then Terry Randolph, Jose's secretary, called me. And they said, you got to come back to Atlanta. We're going to Memphis tonight. And I remember getting in that little rental car that Jose had given me, and I got my little tote bag and threw it in real quick. And I remember backing out of the driveway right there at Ralph and Myrtle's house. It's A.P. Henderson now. What was it in 1960? It was Fairplay or something?
Yeah, Fairplay.
Fairplay. I remember driving out of the driveway, and I remember parking that rental car in front of SCLC at 334 Auburn Avenue. And I walked in the door, and Claudette said, how in the world did you get here so quick? She said, I just spoke to you. I said, I don't know, I'm ready to go to Memphis. She said, sit down, you in no shape to go nowhere. I was really a wreck. She said, Willie Bolin is on his way from Macon. He and Gwen are coming to Atlanta, and all of you are going to Memphis. So I waited in the office. Willie Bolin and Gwen had a white, like this van, they had a white, brand new Thunderbird. And when they pulled up, I got in the car with Willie and Gwen, and we started going to Memphis, headed up the road, and they wasn't driving fast enough. So Gwen was reading a book, and Willie was driving. I said, let me drive this new car. He said, okay. He got on the back seat and went to sleep, and I started driving the car. And man, I was running 90, 100, 120. Every now and then he'd touch me on the shoulder. Tyrone, slow down, slow down, slow down. We're going to get there, we're going to get there. I said, okay. So as soon as he went back to sleep, I hit it again. And on the way to Memphis, we didn't realize it then. But 4 years ago, when the Atlanta Journal-Constitution was doing a profile and a kind of a special pull-out section on the assassination of Dr. King, Jim Achmoody, one of their feature writers, called me up and he said, we want to interview you because you were one of the young rookies on Dr. King's staff in '68, and we know you were in Walton County. And we know you rode to Memphis with Willie Bolin. I said, that's true. He said, you drove the car, right? I said, yeah, I did most of the way. He said, do you realize that as you was driving to Memphis, James Earl Ray had left Memphis and was driving his little white Mustang to Atlanta, and you all met on the highway, just like that. You passed each other. I said, I had no idea. I never thought of that. He said, based on the FBI timeline, you met each other on that road. You were going to Memphis, and he was leaving Memphis, coming to Atlanta, and he parked his little white Mustang in the projects, Capitol Home projects. That's where the FBI found his car. When we got to Memphis, Memphis was burning. It's about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I could not go to sleep. I walked around Memphis all night. There were National Guard troops on every corner with rifle and bayonet. The next morning, Dr. Abernathy convened us at Reverend Billy Kyle's church. And Aretha Franklin was singing her songs. She was vintage Aretha. She was singing song after song. Then her daddy, Reverend C.L. flew in from Detroit. And he started preaching. And when he started preaching, the church was jam-packed. He started preaching. People were crying. I mean, they were all in the windows. They had to let the windows up. I mean, they were in the balcony. They were sitting on the floor. They were outside. They had speakers on outside. And Reverend Franklin, he preached so hard. He preached. And then finally, Dr. Abernathy convened us. And Dr. Abernathy said, I have something I want to read to you.
There we go. Right here.
I have it right here. Dr. Abernathy, I clipped this for a reason. Dr. Abernathy, when we passed these out at the prayer vigil 2 weeks ago. He said, for any of you who would linger in the cemetery and tarry around the grave, I have news for you, said Dr. Ralph David Abernathy, just days after the murder of his fallen leader and best friend, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We have business on the road to freedom, we must prove to white America that you can kill the leader, but you cannot kill the dream.
All right.
That's what Dr. Abernathy was telling us at Reverend Kyle's church that next day, April 5th. So just to kind of prepare you and let you know what we want you as our new leader at SCLC to do. We want SCLC to take this, you're our president, and make this one of your priorities. The NAACP has done it. Rainbow Push has done it. Charles Steele will be here later today at the bridge. We just feel like all of us have to make sure that the Malcolms and the Dorseys who were murdered are not forgotten, and that the rule of law will be applied here as we're applying the rule of law around the world, so to speak. Last year we had Bill Mygott here. Bill Mygott, who used to work for Channel 2, he runs the Anti-Defamation League. He spoke, and he said he was so happy to be here representing the Jewish community. And he said to us, he said, in the Jewish culture, we call this Passover. And he said, we are happy to join forces with you because there are two groups in America who've been victimized by lynchings: African Americans and Jews. And I told him, I said, yeah, we know about Leo Frank, who was taken out of a jail in Millersville and lynched on the square in Marietta. And we know of other Jews who've been lynched because they happen to be of a different religion, different culture. And Bill Mygott said, keep up the struggle. He said, you got to stay on it. You can't stop doing what you're doing. We have a retired FBI agent. His name is Bill Fleming. He lives in Birmingham. He worked on the 16th Street Baptist Church bombings. He worked on the Michael Swinner, James Cheney, Andrew Goodman lynching in Philadelphia, Mississippi. And he told Robert Howard, when Charles Steele put this on us, he said, don't hold back when you do the reenactment. You gotta make it real. You gotta be brutal. You gotta use the N-word. You gotta have the blood. You gotta take the baby out of Dorothy Malcolm. He said, don't hold back. He said, you will touch the conscience of America. You will touch Congress. You'll touch the White House. He said, don't be bashful about this. You just got to lay it out there. And it's going to be, some people don't want to use the N-word, but they were using the N-word in 1946. That was the lingo. And he said, you know, you just got to make it real. So he drives from Birmingham over here, even though he's retired now, because he wants to make a contribution to seeing justice brought to the Boys Ford Bridge lynchings. So that's a little bit of history for you. As you are our new leader. This is our new national president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Reverend Howard Creecy Jr. That's who is here.